on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
And joining me in the Tan Talk studio are my two co-hosts, both attorneys. First, Kevin Carey, also a former circuit court judge, and our Voice of Reason senior political analyst, Gary Gibbons. In the second hour of the program, today we're going to be talking with Dan Mannix, who is a senior portfolio manager with Provise Management Group in Clearwater, who is going to explain the significance of the declining value of the U.S. dollar and a lot of other interesting financial issues. He's not going to be giving you stock buying advice, but rather talk about some of the economic issues that affect all of us as Americans. We want to start with the Epstein files. You know how Trump wants to put his name on virtually everything, probably wants to rename the whole country after himself. Well, one of the legitimate things he can put his name on is the Trump Epstein files. We should call it that from now on, because he's clearly tied up in this, much as he wants us to believe that he's nothing but an innocent bystander who didn't know what was going on. And his name is estimated to have come up in the files. How many times? As many as
more than a
thousands.
Couple.
Yeah.
Jamie Raskin said 1 million when he Googled, when he put it in the search engine.
Yeah.
Ed and Gary, you know what occurred to me this morning? I was going through some YouTube stuff and thinking about, what we could talk about today. The disclosure of the victims was not inadvertent. It was intentional, because those documents had the attorney's name whited out. But so they knew what they were doing, and they did that. That wasn't, as Bondi was saying, well, we couldn't get to everything. It's like a full garage full of papers, and it was not inadvertent. It was done to make a point, because they did white out one or two names on that list. And I knew that last week, but the more I thought about it, how mean-spirited that is. They're telling these victims that you're going to pay a price if you want to keep going forward with this.
Cruelty is the hallmark of this administration and everything that they do. From the immigration policies to their handling of or mishandling of the Epstein file.
Was it, as you like to say, I can't argue with that, my friend. I agree with you.
Cruelty and corruption is too, because an attorney general's job is not to serve as the president's protector. She works for the country, right? And when she sees crime in any branch of government, including the executive branch, her job is to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute it. But instead, we saw that unbelievable performance last week. I know it's almost getting to be stale news when she appeared at a congressional hearing. And it wasn't just that she was so much scamming everybody with her answers, but that she actually was committing perjury, and a California representative named Dan Liu accused her of committing perjury, literally, when she denied the existence of any evidence of the orange pedophiles' involvement with underage girls. Listen.
Like former Prince Andrew, Donald Trump attended various parties with Jeffrey Epstein. I want to know, were there any underage girls at that party or at any party that Trump attended with Jeffrey Epstein?
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things Donald Trump has done. There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that. This has been the most transparent presidency. He's the one that asked that those files.
I'm going to claim my time. I got your answer. You said there's no evidence.
Trump asked
Chairman, please stop the clock.
Stop the clock. The legislation. This is
time belongs to the gentleman from California.
Okay. I'm going to put up another document from a witness who called the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, because I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you, here is a witness statement who called into the FBI's Threat Operations Center. He drove Donald Trump around in a limo. He overheard what Donald Trump said to Jeffrey on his cell phone. He was so angry, he was going to stop a limo and hurt Donald Trump. And he met a girl who said she was raped by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. She later had her head blown off, and officers at the scene said that could not have been suicide. No one at the Department of Justice interviewed this witness. You need to interview this witness immediately. Epstein should rot in hell. So should the men who patronized his operation. And as we sit here today, there are over 1,000 sex trafficking victims, and you have not held a single man accountable. Shame on you. If you had any decency, you would resign right after this hearing concludes.
The gentleman has expired.
You know how Webster comes up with a new few words every year, the Bitcoin or whatever, then they add it into the dictionary. I think it's time for them to come up with this year's word, which would be bondy. It'll be a verb. And it means to answer questions with a non sequitur or an insult. So we can, it really describes exactly what she's done here.
When you make a false statement to Congress, I think it can be either under oath or not under oath. It is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. She said there was no evidence. That's a false statement. Now, if she wanted to be more lawyerly and say there was, in her belief, there was no credible evidence and add the word credible in there, but she did not. She said there was no evidence, which was a patently false statement. And then for her to get all, her upset about what the congressman said back to her, she doesn't choose her language very well. Trump doesn't. But for someone who's attorney general, she should be a whole lot more careful in what she says.
Well, I think it was actually a strategy that she was employing to go there and just be argumentative and call names and have that burn book that she had with all the opposition research in it. And I think what she was really trying to do was to avoid answering questions that could put her in jeopardy for committing perjury. And by not answering any of the real questions that were posed to her, she did a pretty good job of that, except in that one instance where Ted Lieu, got her to make that statement. Yeah. So,
well, you're right.
I think that's why she was so indignant about it as well, because it's like, damn, I even screwed up my own game plan here.
So I talked to a good friend who's a Republican yesterday and he was complaining about the speeches made by the Democrats and just asked a question. And it is a hearing, and we've talked about this. As lawyers and judges, court hearings, you ask a question, you answer that question, you move on. So it really wasn't a hearing from either side. I mean, one side was giving speeches, the other side wasn't answering any questions. So it really wasn't a hearing at all. It was more just a food fight.
And she mentions the transparency of the Trump administration. It is truly transparent in its corruption, and its blatant corruption, especially in view of the fact that, again, she's serving him, not the people who pay her salary. Isn't this the foundation of an oligarchy or a dictatorship? This is right out of the Orban playbook.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is why little Marco's over there shaking hands with Viktor Orban saying, we want you in another term because you're helping show us the playbook for how to turn our country into a fascist oligarchy.
Well, you're exactly right, Ed. You read my mind. If you had any doubt about that, you just had to see what happened with Rubio and over last week. And the countries that Trump supports are, and we've talked about this many times, North Korea, Russia, Hungary, they're not the countries that are democracies.
Yeah. Well, now what I think we're noticing, though, is the fact that a lot of MAGA people, hardline MAGA people, are starting to flip on this administration. I'll give you an example. Let's listen to what a MAGA-friendly podcaster named Sean Ryan had to say about what the Justice Department is not doing about the Trump Epstein files.
You're going to protect pedophiles. You're going to protect pedophiles rather than go after them and hope that everybody's happy that the Dow hit 50,000.
Yeah.
Are you out of your mind? I guess the whole drain the swamp campaign promise was another lie, huh? Man, the lies are stacking up fast. I've never seen so many lies appear in what, a year? It's only been a year. Look at all the lies.
Wish I could talk that way, but it'd throw me out of the studio. But I mean, this guy is clearly riled, right? And he is a MAGA podcaster.
Well, that's the point you made from the start, which is valid, Ed and Gary, is that the problem that Trump has is that you've got the MAGA side upset. And you had Trump, who campaigned upon this issue last year. We're going to get the bottom of all this and all these pedophiles. So you've got people on the same side that support him that are not happy right now. It's not just the Democrats.
And is that also leading to these election results we're seeing around the country that we have seen ever since this second administration came along, where Democrats are winning by very significant margins in formerly Republican districts?
Yeah, by the way, there's a 5-year statute of limitations on not speaking truthfully to Congress. So if a Democrat is back in the White House and there's a different DOJ, Bondi, it does have the risk of being indicted for that perjury.
And now former Prince Andrew has been pinched for apparently providing state secrets to Epstein, which doesn't that hint at blackmail? It sure does to me.
Absolutely. I think that was his MO. He was able to get information on all of these people for what they were doing in secret and use that to his advantage. And then there are also allegations about him being at the center of money laundering internationally. And I heard one today that was talking about some of the Epstein files. That they were looking at the estate tax returns that are documents in that file. And there were some references to some art pieces that they believe could have been stolen art pieces from a big heist that happened in Boston back in the 90s. That those pieces have never been recovered. And using art is a great way to launder money because it's not titled and it's, moves from point A to point B, and you can put a value on it of whatever you want. So I think it's been used for a long time for that purpose.
I think one of the embarrassing aspects of this is that there are other countries that are taking this more seriously than this country.
Right.
Great Britain, you mentioned Andrew, other countries that have been persons implicated in the files. And you see the United States where this is where it all happened and just turning a blind eye to it, which is just wrong.
Some corporations
it's
too.
a crisis of lack of morality. Really, our country is like sinking into a new low because of this. And it starts at the top. I mean, you can just see the way that he acts about everything. And the fact that these other countries immediately, and some corporations, there was a lawyer at Goldman Sachs that had to step down, one at Paul Weiss that had to step down, but not in the government, not in the cabinet.
No,
None of them have to step down.
Do either of you think we'll ever really see the essential substance of these files? I mean, maybe it'd be 3 years after Trump dies that they'll eventually come out, or do you think that maybe the Justice Department will destroy it all before we ever get to see it? Say, you've seen what's important. We've decided what you get to see, and then we're just going to destroy it to protect the victims.
Yeah, what's the FBI doing with all those affidavits that were filed by the victims? That none of those have been turned over yet. Are they still in existence? I don't know.
Well, step by step, the next step I think is going to be filing a civil suit asserting a violation of the federal statute that it was not at all complied with. Bondi is now saying that's everything, and it's not everything. And they're they're protecting people, and a lot of it I think is Trump protecting his buddies. I do think he also was aware, whether or not he's a pedophile, I don't know that, but I have no doubt he was aware of what was going on there, but he's protecting his wealthy friends. That's the other main impetus.
Yeah, and they're starting to take some of these depositions, and let's make it clear, it's the Democrats on the oversight committee that are taking these depositions. None of the Republicans have participated in it, which again is shameful. But that's what our system is these days. Everybody's scared of their leader. So,
well, speaking of Trump for a moment, people have talked about, I think rightfully so, his diminished mental capacity. I listened on YouTube this morning when I woke up this morning early, and I was just playing with YouTube. A doctor give I thought, a very strong argument that he doesn't have Alzheimer's. What he has is called frontal lobal dementia. It's another type dementia. As listeners may know, dementia is the overall term. It's not Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, but there are other forms of dementia. And he went through. It was amazing how specific he was. The various aspects of how Trump behaves, that he believes it's frontal lobal dementia. So you've heard it here first.
Yeah. But aren't his actions in this term now being guided by an attempt to divert our attention from these Epstein files? In the first term, it was all about what's in it for me. That was the foundation of every decision he made as president. Now it's not only what's in it for me and how many million can I grift from this decision, but also what decisions that I make will most effectively distract Americans from the Epstein files. If we, by this time next week, we may be in a war with Iran, right? For that reason.
You'd asked a minute ago about how long this may go on or whether there's ever going to be accountability. I think it will continue because, and you mentioned, Gary, about just, the basic morality aspect of this, pedophilia and taking, and you mentioned money laundering as well, but just the concept of pedophilia and young girls who are 13, 14, and maybe even younger than
one
that.
as young as 9.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think my point is that strikes so deeply into the core of what I hope are still morals in this country. It's really not about politics, and that's why you've got just not Democrats but also the MAGA people. So I think it will continue. I think my view, there's going to have to be a whole lot more accountability when the Democrat gets in the White House after 2028 than what happened in 2020. There was not a whole lot of that. I think we had Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who for whatever reason was hesitant. He was not at all aggressive. And my personal opinion is, as a former judge, appellate judge, and he should have been on the Supreme Court. We all know that story.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably not the mindset you need for an aggressive Attorney General. And I think it's we can look back and now we can't change that, but I think we need a much more aggressive approach to accountability when we take back the White House in 2028.
And that assumes we have an election that is a free and fair election, which we have had up until now. And I still assert that if Trump is still alive, he's going to find some way to prevent that election from taking place so he can remain in power for life. And everything he does points in that direction.
Well, and the point you've made, Ed, about even this year with the midterms, I do think, and I've heard it more and more. I know you've been saying it for a long time, but I think Trump understands he will, if it's a fair election, he will lose. He sees what's been happening.
Yeah.
And so hopefully, because that awareness is out there, and it is, again, a state-by-state issue, we can do what we can to try and push back against that.
And won't the big hint be whatever comes of the raid in Fulton County? That was done for some reason. We haven't seen it yet, but sooner or later, some people are going to be prosecuted, probably, as the Justice Department is completely weaponized, and there's going to be shown to be a recount.
What's really disturbing about that is now that they've unsealed the affidavit that was used to get the search warrant to seize those documents, it was based on these allegations which have been disproven in multiple lawsuits by this election denier guy who signed this affidavit, and it was really a failure by the magistrate judge who looked at that. Mark Elias was talking about it yesterday, and he said when you look at everybody that's done any work in the realm of election security knows this name of this gentleman, and I don't have it in front of me, but he said he's just been renowned for being an election denier conspiracy theorist.
Well,
and the whole time, every time he's raised one of these theories, it's been shot down in a court of law. But yet this particular, he just made a summary of all of them and put it in this affidavit saying this must have happened in Fulton County. And the judge should have just kicked that to the curb instead of saying, there's evidence of a crime that's been committed here. That was really a screw up.
You mentioned Mark Elias. I believe he's probably the most important person right now to prevent this, because he's the primary Democratic attorney. He's got over 60 to 70 cases. It is a state by state. The big issue with Georgia, that should never have been a federal issue.
Yeah,
the elections are handled by the states. And again, we've said this before. I love how these conservatives talk about states' rights when they just ram right over it. There was no reason. What happened with the federal government getting involved was beyond the fact the affidavit was false. The fact they even got involved was wrong. The state had already confirmed the fact that it was a free and fair election. Trump had lost the election, and let's move on.
Trump's own administration has done research into whether it was fair, a fair election, and Christopher Krebs, says the most secure election in history. Bill Barr said it was BS. If there were all these theories of election interference were BS, and on down the line. And so, yeah, they're the most transparent administration in history, because they have said what we really need to do is federalize the elections, and we need to send ICE into the polling places. And Trump has been very specific about certain cities that he thinks that they should take control of the voting and count the votes because they can't be trusted. That's just one step away from a dictatorship.
Yeah, and isn't that why Trump is so opposed to mail-in ballots? A voter who mails his or her ballot in can't be intimidated at a polling place,
right,
like somebody who walks into the polling place line and sees a couple of ICE goons standing there, armed to the teeth, coming over to talk to him.
Yeah,
right.
He
hates mail-in.
Yeah, let's be very clear. The Republican strategy, the only way they win is to cheat in November, because they know right now they know they will not win a free and fair election, so they need to cheat. Now they do that a number of ways, and as you mentioned, Ed, they don't want the mail-in, but they're going to intimidate voters from coming to the polls by whether it's ICE or other law enforcement. But secondly, and you mentioned about getting these voter rolls in Georgia, they can also intimidate before that by contacting these people even before that election day and saying, you better not vote for whatever reason, whether it's an immigration issue or some other issue. But there's no doubt their strategy is to suppress the vote, because they understand that if it was just a free and fair election, they would lose. And the evidence of that, unlike my friend Bondi was saying, there's no evidence of Trump's misconduct, which is not true. There's full evidence almost every week with these elections in every state. We had one just last week. We could make a list, and every one of them has had the Democrat overperforming. Every one of them. There's not been one exception to that in the last 3 or 4 months.
And speaking of failures, the effort to weaponize the Justice Department under the crooked Donald administration has failed again, because the indictments against the half dozen Congress people who pointed out that American troops should not follow illegal orders failed again. They should have tried for a ham sandwich, or at least a Cuban sandwich. I understand there's a very good probability you can indict a Cuban sandwich and maybe 90% turkey, but ham, no. And again, this is word for word what Popoff Pete, now the head of the Pentagon, the War Department, said back in 2016. He elaborated extensively on how it is that the military should not obey illegal orders. So why isn't he being rounded up and indicted? He said the same thing they did, none of which is illegal. A, because it is in the Constitution that they're not supposed to do that, and B, they have what's called freedom of speech in this country to say what they want. This is trying to be framed as some form of sedition, which is bunk.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, the thing with Trump is he does so many things that are wrong. It tends to minimize each of them. But let's just look at that one thing, that they would try and indict, as you just mentioned, 6 Congress people, including Mark Kelly. He was a senator, astronaut. The fact they even try and do that is incredible. That act alone would be enough to say we got a serious problem with this administration.
Right.
Well, we have the speech and debate clause that applies to members of Congress, and they are our representatives and are there to be able to speak their mind on our behalf. And they have been protected from prosecution for that forever. And the fact that they even thought about bringing a case against these people is totally unconstitutional.
Well, what Trump has
Separate
done,
branches of Congress.
I mean, Trump has brought in a third world concept. I'm going to indict, imprison my political enemies, and or kill them. I mean, there are people being killed on the streets wrongfully, and those murders are being ignored. And that's that's at the feet of Trump and his administration, that they're ignoring these murders.
This idea that he was going to unify the country when he is the most divisive president in our lifetime, probably in history, singling out all Democrats as if they're communists and the enemy of the country. He was going to deny all Democratic governors admittance to this event that he's having in the White House, the governor's conference. He's finally decided that only 2 of them are going to be prohibited from attending. And one of them, who was interviewed about it, said, well, I consider this a badge of honor. It means I'm getting to the guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're going to pause for a quick timeout for some important messages. I'm your host, Ed Golly, my co-host, Gary Gibbons, and Kevin Carey. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the issues going on in Florida politics, and the governor's race is already underway, even though it's months away from now, but it's taking shape, and more of the other issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
By the way, if you'd like to reach out to us by email, the address is WTANvoice@AOL.com. That's pretty easy to remember, WTANvoice@AOL.com. Well, guess what? Early voting has already begun. It started Tuesday in Texas, where the primary on March 3rd is going to serve as the de facto midterm kickoff. The big question, can GOP Senator John Cornyn avoid becoming the first incumbent senator since 2012 to be denied renomination? Now, most likely, the Republican race is not going to be formally decided on primary night, with a runoff looming if no candidate breaks 50% of the vote. But signs are ominous for Cornyn, and an underwhelming showing at the initial round of voting could seal his fate. A poll of likely primary voters from the University of Houston released last week showed Cornyn is lagging behind Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton by 38% to 31%, with Representative Wesley Hunt running in third with 17%. And more troubling for Cornyn is, let me say that right, Cornyn. The poll showed him losing by 11 points to Paxton in a one-on-one runoff. And it found that Paxton was far more popular with GOP voters. He's got a 50-point net favorable rating compared with only 31 for Cornyn, which only makes perfect sense since Paxton has demonstrated exemplary corruption while in office, which seems to be these days a prerequisite to attracting Republican voters. Paxton, you recall, he was impeached by the GOP-controlled Texas House in 2023. Let me say that again. The Republican House of Representatives impeached him. That's how corrupt he is. And then he was acquitted in the state Senate. He also agreed in 2024 to pay just under $300,000 as part of a deal to end a nearly decade-long securities fraud case. Cornyn's hope is that Republican voters can be turned away from Paxton by fear that he'd make a ripe target for Democrats and put the seat at risk in November. But it's really the independent voters that Paxton needs to be concerned about, because they'll probably decide that race, along with most others coming up this year. Let me just finish by saying the University of Houston poll found both Cornyn and Paxton running almost identically against either potential Democratic nominee. Guess who they are? Jasmine Crockett, who's a representative, I believe, from the east side of Texas, and James Tallarico, Paxton, who was the fella that CBS didn't want interviewed on the Colbert show.
The Streisand effect is in full force here. Apparently, since Colbert put that interview on YouTube, it's had more than 6 million views, which is much higher than his normal audience.
Yeah, Ed and Gary, Cornyn's going to lose that race. We don't need to debate that. He's going to lose that race. I think that as in Trump endorsed Paxton because he is more of a criminal. He's much more like Trump. I mean,
he's got a rap sheet.
Might pick him to succeed Bondi if he gets rid of her.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he would not just beat Cornyn, but as you mentioned, it's not by just a couple points. He is soundly ahead of Cornyn. And here's a guy that's a typical John Cornyn, Republican from Texas. Yeah, he's not crazy, but he probably wonders what he's got to do. But really, I don't have any sympathy for any of these other Republicans. They could have gotten rid of Trump, when in the impeachment, and he wouldn't be around. But he's not crazy enough for Trump. And the second issue, just quickly, I think this Tellerica. I think the person who's hurt by this issue with the CBS is Crockett, because I think it's given Tellerica a big push. And as you said, Gary, that it's been all over the internet, and
he's been interviewed now by all these news shows, because of that. It's snubbing by CBS.
You're going to have a Tellerica Paxton general election in November.
It's just amazing. I mean, as much crime as this guy has committed, he's the Attorney General of the state of Texas. What the hell is going on in this country?
What's great?
You've got to have a rap sheet to be taken seriously by this crime syndicate posing as the Republican Party.
That's the morality I mentioned earlier. We just don't have it.
Well, you mentioned the independents in Texas. Texas, for the last 5 to 10 years, there's been talk of us in these U.S. Senate races, et cetera, of Texas getting more blue, but it hasn't happened. So this may be an opportunity to see if it's going to happen. That would be a huge benefit toward getting control of the Senate.
Well, Tallarico for a long time, he's a state senator, and he's done a really good job because he's actually studying to become a minister as well. And he uses the Bible to talk to these, white Christian nationalist people and explain to them how on terms that they can understand how what they're doing is not, the golden rule and all of the things in the Bible that they should be, and pointing out their defects in their thinking on all these things. And instead of it coming from somebody like me, it's coming from someone who actually believes the same way that they do. And it's it's really turning them on their ear. They're having a hard time.
Well, he's a very attractive candidate. I think he could give Paxton a run for his money. On the FCC issue, by the way, that was also improper what they did. I mean, we want to sit here and list, Ed, I've said before, Gary and I have, in law school, you have the exams which basically say list all the issues. This is one issue which we haven't really talked about is what they attempted to do was wrong, saying that the talk show had to give equal time. That's not correct at all. There's an exemption for that.
Yeah.
If you actually cared about the law. So what they did to begin with, even it blew up in their face, which helped our side of the table, but it also was illegal what they did.
Well, our rant of the week involves an issue that is tied to elections called the Save, let me get this right, the Save America Act. We're going to hear again from Liz Oyer, who was the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, and she's going to weigh in on the pending tragedy of that Save America Act.
The Save America Act is actually much more dangerous than most people realize. It's not just about making it harder to vote. It's a strategy to undermine the 2026 midterm elections. Here's what you need to know. The Save America Act is a voter ID law that just passed the House of Representatives. It would require proof of U.S. citizenship to vote. Most discussions about this law have focused on the fact that it could prevent millions of people from voting because they don't have the required documents. The law would require voters to show either a valid passport, which half of Americans don't have, or a birth certificate that matches the name on their valid state ID, which again, many people don't have. That's a huge problem. But there's an even bigger problem that no one is talking about. The Save America Act creates huge administrative burdens for election officials around the country. There are over 10,000 local election offices that run our elections nationwide. This law would require all of them to make major changes to their operations. The requirements take effect immediately with no grace period for implementation. The law also provides no funding to comply with these new rules. In other words, it sets up our elections to fail, and that is intentional. We have midterm elections this year. Trump knows they might not go his way, so he wants them to be chaotic. He wants to make it hard for local jurisdictions to comply with the law so that he can challenge the outcomes he does not like, just like he did in 2020. That's what this law is about. It's about creating a path for Trump and his allies to sow doubts about the fairness of our elections. By the way, non-citizens voting is not even a real problem. Data shows that it almost never happens. For example, the state of Utah just spent months reviewing its voter rolls. It found that out of more than 2 million registered voters, there was only one who was a non-citizen, and that person never actually voted. Supporters of the Save America Act are saying it's no different than requiring ID to buy a beer. It's actually quite different because voting is a constitutional right of all Americans. Buying beer is not. And honestly, Americans would be up in arms if you needed a passport to buy a beer. Here's a better analogy. What if our government started requiring proof that you're a practicing Christian before you can enter a church to exercise your right to worship? That would never fly because our government is supposed to make it easier, not harder, for us to exercise our constitutional rights. If the Save America Act passes, there will definitely be legal challenges. And fortunately, it does not currently have the support it would need to pass the Senate. At least one Republican, Lisa Murkowski, has said she won't support it. Susan Collins, on the other hand, says she will. So let's keep the pressure on.
The Save America Act now has support from 50 Republican senators. The bill supported by Crooked Donald and passed the House last week, meaning the Senate's 60-vote filibuster rule is the only thing standing in the way of it becoming law. Can you expand on that a little bit? Explain what that means?
If they decide to change the Senate rules, which John Thune has the power to do as the majority leader of the Senate, they could pass it on a majority vote, and Trump would sign it in a heartbeat, because this will, disenfranchise most of the millions of women that changed their names when they got married, and just took their husband's name, but that's a different name. That's what's shown on their birth certificate. It really, on many grounds, it's a poll tax, because you have to pay for, these to get the records that you would need to do to establish that you are a citizen. But many people say, well, you have to show an ID, and real ID. That's a term of art now. Real ID is one that shows that you've actually been verified as a citizen. Well, there are only 5 states that have incorporated that into their driver's license requirements. So people that think that they'll be able to use their driver's license in other states, they, other than those 5, are screwed. So it's going to create chaos at the polls. It's going to, he's going to use that as a justification to send in armed, ICE agents to preserve the safety of people that might want to go vote or who are thrown out because they've been purged from the rolls. And this is something that's been going on in state legislatures that are controlled by Republicans for years. Look at Florida. They've passed laws many times to take you off the rolls if you don't vote in 2 consecutive elections. You're just purged from the rolls, and you may not realize that, and you show up and it's too late then to register. They've gotten rid of same-day registrations in many places for the same reason. And so it's, again, voting is the only thing that is in the Constitution that's a right, as opposed to buying liquor and the things that they mentioned, Liz Oyer mentioned.
Let me make several points about that. One, again, it's part of their strategy of voter suppression. That's all this is. That, exactly. Again, they understand that if everyone goes to the polls who wants to vote, they will lose, and not lose by a small margin. They also keep ignoring the fact, this cult, that elections are a state by state issue. I'm not sure why they don't get that. Saying they want a federal legislation to mandate to states what states can do. I don't think that's lawful at all. And as Ms. Oyer said, there will be challenges if that statute does pass. But you have to leave to the states the issue of elections, even dealing with elections of federal officers. And there is not, and let me be clear too, there is not a problem. This is a purported problem as a way to cheat. That's what this is.
Yeah, this is they're looking. It's a solution looking for a problem, really. What the Trump administration has been, trying to find fraud anywhere they can, and so they've asked the Department of Homeland Security to actually do a search of voter registrations, and they referred about 10,000 out of 49.5 million voter registrations to the Department of Homeland Security for further investigation. That's roughly 0.02% of the names processed. Not enough to overturn any election anywhere, anytime. And yet this is what they're trying to do to try to get this SAVE Act passed. It doesn't exist. Voter fraud does not exist. And if there were bad registrations by someone that was an immigrant, they haven't proved anywhere that any of them have voted. Anywhere.
No, I agree. And I was born in Japan. My father was in the Air Force. So I had dual citizenship when I was born. I was both a Japanese and U.S. citizen. And at some point when I was eight or 9 years old, I went down to the federal courthouse and chose U.S. citizenship. But I was always a U.S. citizen. But there was never a doubt that I never thought about, and I vote in every election. I've never thought that I have to prove my citizenship. I have a driver's license. I have to prove my identity, but citizenship should never be the issue. Again, we understand what's happening here, and hopefully, and I think this is going to happen. It's getting out there, and people are aware of what's happening, and hopefully that act will not pass.
Yeah, they're trying to pick the thing that's the hardest to prove, and the most difficult to provide documentation for, and say, okay, well, sorry, you just didn't get it, so you can't vote.
Are either of you disturbed about the orange pedophiles' efforts to rewrite history? Like, for example, what happened up in Philadelphia?
Yeah, how about that? There was a judge, thankfully, that there was an exhibit of 9 people that George Washington and his wife had as slaves that they lived for a short time in Philadelphia, but
that was the original capital.
Yeah,
for
a short
right?
period of time, Philadelphia was the
Right.
capital of the country, and Washington lived there with his slaves, as one did at the time. And the administration took that down, saying that it directed the Interior Department to ensure that these sites do not display elements that, quote, inappropriately disparage Americans past or living. Remember, the same thing that DeSantis wanted to do here. You can't have anything in history books that might make someone today who's white feel uncomfortable or embarrassed about what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the city of Philadelphia sued in January after the National Park Service removed the explanatory panels from Independence National Historical Park, a site where the Washingtons lived with their 9 slaves in the 1790s. And when Philadelphia was briefly the nation's capital, the removal came after U.S. Judge Cynthia Roof ruled Monday that all materials must be restored in their original condition while the lawsuit challenging the removal's legality plays out. And she prohibited Trump officials from installing replacements that explain history differently, which is what they're trying to do. Just rewrite things. They say that history was written by the victors anyway.
Yeah.
But this is sad.
But it all points toward trying to appease the white nationalists and assert that this country is only for white people, that they've never done anything they should be ashamed of. Forget genocide against the native people or slavery or any of those things. We're supposed to learn from the mistakes our ancestors made.
Exactly right.
At the time, they didn't see anything wrong with it, right? It was a perfectly natural way to treat people.
Well, again, it's a problem that I never, at 67 years old, I never thought that there was a problem with the textbooks, somehow not properly, or putting too much guilt on the white person. Look, we've done some horrible things, and you made the point. You learn from your mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
What we did with the Indians, but they create these issues that really aren't issues, just as a way to further their very narrow, kind of white-oriented agenda.
Gary mentioned the governor. I mentioned Ken Paxton, the most corrupt attorney general in the history of the nation. Our governor is not overlooking the essential aspect of corruption to succeed in the Republican Party. Kevin, let's talk about that.
We've had kind of like a dog on a bone, this Hope Florida scandal. I think rightly so, and we've had we've talked a lot about this, and I would say thank goodness to Republican Representative Alex Andrade, who has stood up to DeSantis, and DeSantis who does a little bit of a Trump imitation by attacking anyone that opposes him, and we've talked already about and Andrade is proposing legislation to prevent this from happening again, but there's been some response where the federal government's not going to come in on the Hope Florida scandal, which doesn't surprise me because they're not going to. They like criminal conduct if it helps the Republicans. But there's a grand jury in, as we've talked about, in Leon County that is still looking at evidence and could well be indicting, including the current attorney general, who was at the time of the wrongful conduct was the chief of staff for the governor, but who's now making, by the way, $100,000 a year teaching at the university, at my alma mater, University of Florida Law School, for what, a couple hours a week or a month, Gary?
Yeah.
100,000 balloons a year. Within months of the governor handpicking him as the new attorney general.
Yeah, he now makes more than the governor makes. He makes $240,000 a year. For this $100,000 salary from UF has really created a lot of outrage with other people who have done similar things, like teach law school courses. And it's interesting that the article in the paper today talking about that mentioned that Uthmeyer previously taught a class at FSU Law School for $1,500 for the entire semester class. So,
and now if you break that
good
down,
work if you can get it now.
Yeah,
right?
it probably amounts to $1,200 an hour, or for the whole course for the year.
One of the things I think we try and do here is highlight patterns. And one of the patterns here from both Trump and DeSantis is getting rich off government work, which was never the intent. Government work was supposed to be public service, as opposed to getting rich from it, and it's just turned it on its head. But let me go back a little bit to this Hope Florida thing with this issue with DeSantis and his wife Casey. Andrade did not mix words. He said that he believed that they engaged in a conspiracy to commit money laundering and wire fraud, and put it, as I said, very bluntly. And it'd be nice to see some humility from some of these government people,
wouldn't it?
I mean, if they would come out and say, you're right, this was poor judgment. We should not have done this. We were overzealous. It will not happen again. But they don't do that. They come out and act like, oh my God, you're attacking my wife. How dare you? And the standard seems to be, if you don't indict me, which may still happen, it's okay. But there's no question, Gary and Ed, what they did with the Hope Florida, and I won't get into all the details now, we have in the past, was wrong. There's no question what they did.
No question about it.
You can't debate that money was improperly funneled from the settlement to the political purpose.
Yeah.
And ironically, one of the courses that Uthmeyer taught last fall at UF Law School was the implications of executive overreach. Yeah,
well,
you can't make it up,
The whole course can be taught in basically one paragraph. If you want to get wealthy as a lawyer, join the Republican Party crime enterprise, protect the senior people who are grifting, and you'll end up with a cush job and get all kinds of money for nothing.
Yeah.
End of course.
It is.
You want to take the test now?
It is corruption, and there's this. Our country of 250 years has had a long history of corruption, including Democrats, Huey Long in Louisiana. So it's not just, but it's now what the Republicans are doing, and by the way, DeSantis said that all this whole Hope Florida thing was was because of the leftist media and the Florida rhinos, that it was all just a hoax.
Yeah. It's always the media's fault for reporting it. That's why they want to silence the media, right? They want to control and silence the media. CBS is just turned into a castrated, worthless news item. They are now generating fake news. It's pretty obvious to try to protect themselves from the wrath of a weaponized Justice Department and administration.
I mean, there's a level of corruption to some extent just with lobbying. I mean, Bondi went, after she was Attorney General, went to work for Brian Ballard, who I knew who was a lawyer lobbyist in Tallahassee, and they get paid just astronomical amounts of money for just access.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We're lawyers and we generally get paid on an hourly basis, but the numbers, if you really looked into how much they make, it's staggering.
It is. So we'll see how this all plays out. There's more people jumping into the race for governor. What we need to do is find a nice prison cell for DeSantis and his wife to plant them in at the end of his term, so that they can't do any more damage to this state or country.
Well, Alex Andrade, who was the legislator who's been pushing the Hope Florida investigation, when he was told of Uthmeyer's $100,000 contract to teach at UF, he laughed out loud for 10 seconds. It was like, just,
and
it's
no different
unbelievable.
than Kokorin getting the $1 million a year gig to screw up the university down there in
New
Sarasota.
College.
Yeah. He's mucking that all up. So, it pays to be in the party of grift. If only Al Capone knew then what we know now. He was making pocket change to what he could have snagged as president, right?
You got that right.
Well, I hope you'll stay with us for the second hour of The Voice of Reason, which will come up here on the Tan Talk Radio Network following news from CBS. We'll see how newsworthy that is, won't we? And we'll be back with a fellow named Dan Mannix of ProVise Management Group to talk about issues economic that I think will be interesting to all Americans. Listening to The Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network, back with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by JTV.com.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. British police have taken King Charles' brother, the former Prince Andrew, into custody on his 66th birthday over his ties to a scandal on this side of the Atlantic. We have team coverage.
I'm Vicky Barker in London. Andrew's arrest comes after revelations in the Jeffrey Epstein files suggested he leaked confidential information to the late convicted pedophile billionaire while serving as a royal trade envoy. To these Londoners,
It's the last straw, is it really?
I'm pleased. I thought he'd go into hiding and get away with it.
To Vanity Fair's Katie Nichols.
I think for everyone, we are in uncharted territories here. No one quite knows how this is going to play out.
If charged, Andrew would face British justice, which is carried out in the name of the monarch, his own estranged brother.
I'm Michael Wallace. The late Virginia Giuffre, who died by suicide last year, had detailed her accusations against Prince Andrew in her memoir. This morning, her family released a statement saying, "At last, our broken hearts have been lifted at the news that no one is above the law, not even royalty." They said Andrew was never a prince, and they added, "For survivors everywhere, Virginia did this for you."
In Washington,
War and Peace is one of the most important and consequential things I think that I'll be involved in.
President Trump has just convened the first meeting of his new Board of Peace. Its representatives from more than 40 countries are focusing on reconstructing war-battered Gaza.
Gaza is very complex.
The president says board members have pledged $5 billion toward the goal. We've learned the U.S. may be poised to attack Iran in the next couple of days. Correspondent Charlie D'Agata.
This is moving very quickly. So U.S. officials we spoke to said they're preparing for every contingency. Will be ready to strike as soon as Saturday. Now, that could range from like limited airstrikes to what could be a drawn-out conflict with Iran.
Sources tell CBS News President Trump has not made a final decision. 2 U.S. warships are in place in the region. Rescuers say 8 backcountry skiers have been found dead near Lake Tahoe, one still missing after they were caught in an avalanche. CBS's Matt Gutman has new information from Truckee, California.
We understand that most of the people on that trip were women between 33 and 50. We understand that they were very likely mothers. So this is catastrophic.
They're said to have ties to a boarding school for elite skiers. Skip COVID boosters? It may cut the risk of hospitalization and death from an infection in half.
A study of over 3 million people in England is the latest of several showing the effectiveness of the vaccine. While protection does wane over time, it's strongest in the first 70 days after receiving a shot.
CBS's Michael George. This is CBS News.
Looking for spring jewelry looks? Find them at Jewelry Television. New customers get $20 off purchases of $99 or more at JTV.com.
This is Downtown Dave. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the Tan Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the Tan Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, pre-production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Step into the story at the Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Discover all new experiences for the whole family. Set sail for adventure at Buccaneer Bay. Master stealth and speed at the Knights Ninja Challenge. And create enchantment at the Wicked Wand Workshop. Cheer for thundering jousts. Explore shops and games. And bite into the legendary turkey legs. Save on tickets at participating Circle K stores. Or visit BayAreaRenFest.com. The Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Weekends February 14th through March 29th. Huzzah!
Do you have questions after being injured in a car accident or injured because of someone's negligence? Do you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about the next steps after being injured in a crash? The personal injury attorneys at Peronic, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let their decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Dan Mannix of Provise Management Group, which is at 611 Druid Road here in Clearwater, is a senior portfolio manager who joined Provise with over 10 years of experience across various financial markets. He holds the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, has a Bachelor's of Science in Finance degree from the University of South Florida. Now, I want to make it clear, Provise Management is not a sponsor of our program. They neither endorse nor insult any of our comments or political opinions on the program. That's not his purpose whatsoever, because I presume political ideology isn't really very much of a concern for estate planning issues. But Dan has come today to talk to us about economic issues that I think really affect most or all Americans. His remarks are for informational purposes only and don't constitute an offer to sell or solicitation to buy or a recommendation for any securities or investments or strategies. And his opinions are based on current market conditions as of today, subject to change. Past performance not indicative of future results, and all investments involve risk, including potential loss of principal. Unless, of course, you're the president selling cryptocurrency, then there's no risk. Consult with your financial advisor to determine how this information will apply to your specific situation. My two co-hosts today, both attorneys. Kevin Carey is also a former circuit court judge, and our voice of reason senior political analyst, Gary Gibbons. So quickly, Dan, explain to us the difference between a financial manager and a stockbroker, because you're not a stock brokerage house, even though you, of course, put your clients into equities.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me, gentlemen. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. So a stockbroker, as you would think historically, is someone who's going to dial for dollars, right? They're going to be calling anybody they can speak with to say, hey, we think you should buy this stock, and here's the reason why. Would love for you to do that using me, and I'll get paid a commission. I don't care what happens with the stock after that fact. That's your problem to deal with. We are fiduciaries. Provise Management Group is a registered investment advisor, and we take a fiduciary duty for our clients. We are a financial advising firm. And so what we're doing essentially is we're saying, here's your financial situation. Here are the goals that you have. Here's how we're going to help you accomplish those goals. And we will use brokers in order to buy and sell different securities that are within your portfolio to help you accomplish those goals.
And to do that, you and the staff need a keen understanding of all issues, economic, national, international, currency exchanges, T-bills, everything.
That's a lot.
Which is why we asked you in today, because I've seen reports that the U.S. dollar has dropped 12% in value over the past year, but we have 3% inflation. So kind of dissect that for us. What is that measured against, that 12% drop? I presume it's foreign currencies, but who determines what that currency is and how it's concluded to have dropped 12%?
Yeah, that's right. So what you're referring to is what we call the Dixie index. That's the DXY index, the dollar index. And so essentially what that does is it takes the value of a dollar relative to a basket of foreign currencies. More than half of it is the euro. So that's going to be the biggest chunk of what we're measuring the dollar against. It also has the Japanese yen, Canadian dollar, British pound, several different currencies. And so that's effectively saying, here's what the dollar is worth overseas. Inflation, what you're speaking on, like consumer price inflation, let's say, that's saying for someone who lives in America, how much is the price of a basket of goods that's determined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to represent what an average American would be buying. What's happened with the prices there, and that's how they're measuring inflation.
And so the president wants to see the dollar drop even further against foreign currencies. And I presume the primary reason is because it makes it easier for American manufacturers to sell to foreign markets.
That's exactly right. So that's going to make our exports more attractive because it's going to be cheaper for a German or somebody living in Japan, let's say. But on the flip side of that, that's going to make our imports more expensive, right? For an American that needs to purchase a BMW French wine. There you go. Let's not even get into tariffs, but just, thinking specifically about the value of a dollar, that's going to incrementally add to the cost of the things that we purchase. And some of those things will likely end up in the CPI basket, the basket of goods that are representative of consumer price inflation. And that would then directly impact our inflation.
And it's a trade war too. With this tariff problem, that other countries are going to be imposing tariffs. That to the extent Trump is saying, let's help exports. Contrary to that, the tariffs are going to hurt exports because the other countries are going to be imposing tariffs as well. So,
have other presidents been fixated with lowering the value of the dollar like Trump is?
There certainly has been in the past, different political regimes, I would say, on both sides of the aisle. And I think the reasoning behind that, particularly in a global world, so let's think about like a US corporation, right? So a multinational corporation that is based out of the US, they're probably going to get half of their revenue from international markets. So if I'm getting half of my revenue in euros, half of my revenue in Japanese yen, and I'm then translating that back into US dollars, that's going to, I would say, quote unquote, artificially inflate my dollar earnings. And so that's going to help my corporate earnings growth and so make my stock more valuable. So that's a positive, I would say, for a weakening dollar for the corporate environment. And so whenever there's been presidents that have been maybe more focused on that, that might be a measure that they take. It also just kind of depends on where the dollar is currently. Keep in mind that the dollar has been extremely expensive, I would say, or it has appreciated a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. And so some would say that this is just kind of naturally getting back to an equilibrium.
What do you think the reason is that it's appreciated over that period of time?
Capital flows. So when you think about the capital markets, what I'm referring to is equity markets, bond markets, commodity markets, whatever they may be, real estate markets. The US has been so attractive since the Great Financial Crisis. If you go to pre-Great Financial Crisis, the European market was about the same size, if not larger than the US, as far as the equity markets. We've like more than doubled in size relative to the European equity markets. So that means a lot of investors overseas are pouring money into US markets. And the US Treasury market is the largest debt market in the world. And so whenever an investor wants to buy a US asset, they have to purchase US dollars. And so that's going to increase the value of the dollar.
Wow. Well, now you said you didn't want to talk about tariffs, but we kind of do because it's a little difficult to see how that's affecting the U.S. consumer since they seem to be on, then off. And it's difficult to believe that they are not affecting prices because if it costs more to buy something that's manufactured in another country, then U.S. company making the same type of a product with furniture or whatever, it can now charge more. So doesn't that really lead directly to inflation, or keep it at least 3%?
Academically speaking, yes. I mean, if you're increasing the related costs or the ancillary costs of an item, that somebody's got to pay that cost, right?
Mhm.
Historically, it does eventually feed through to consumer prices. As we sit right now, wholesalers, corporations have borne the lion's share of those incremental costs, but they can't do that forever, right? I mean, these are for-profit companies. And so eventually that will get passed on more to the consumer. It's hard to say right now how much of that has actually passed on to the consumer, just because this has been so in flux. I mean, go back to April of last year versus where we are today. There's been like 50 different tariff regimes in a matter of less than a year. So keeping up with it, you need a poli-sci degree. But the way that we're looking at it is it's being used as a negotiating tool, as a deal tactic,
Yeah.
and sometimes successful, sometimes not successful. And where that shakes out, I think, depends on A, what the actual tariff rules or laws are, and B, who's actually abiding by them. Because a lot of these corporations, a lot of these countries are getting really clever with how they are exporting their goods and how they're importing goods in order to sidestep, get around tariffs, not in an illegal way, but potentially in a moral way.
You know, Dan, we're trying to keep politics not somewhat out of this hour and more at economics, but you made a point that I think is valid about it's being used. It's been unstable, and it's been very unstable because it's being used for other purposes to put pressures on these other countries. But the history of tariffs is not a very positive history. You know, Smoot-Hawley. I mean, it hasn't been successful. It seems to me objectively. I think it's hard to argue that tariffs have been effective in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to push you down back in the politics way, but do you view, from your background, do you view tariffs as something that's effective? And you may say that's really outside your purview.
I would say as far as our purview is concerned, I wouldn't. The revenue that is received via tariffs for the trade-off of the trade relationships is not worth it. That it's not something that's incrementally worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze, is what I'd say. Now,
good way to put it.
The impending trade negotiations and what happens with the trade deals, that's yet to be seen. Does it do enough from a negotiating bargain chip perspective to make it all worth it? I don't think we can say yes or no just yet. But the immediate revenues that are received for the tariffs, yes, it's positive. But I would argue that it's not enough for the battles that it has caused.
Yeah, when you mentioned that the companies, at least initially, are bearing that cost or most of the cost, but can't continue, I would think that's going to happen. They're not going to continue. I mean, these are for-profit corporations that have fiduciary duties to shareholders. They're not going to keep bearing these costs, it seems to me. So.
Yeah, and it depends on consumer behavior as well, right? So when those costs actually do come through to consumers, do they buy California wine instead of French wine? Do they change their right, exactly. So how much of that actually shows up? And some of that might already be taking place. We talked about inflation briefly. Inflation hasn't increased since tariffs have come into effect. And so it hasn't gotten there yet. And I think, again, there's a couple different reasons. That's other countries being able to sidestep the tariffs. I think that's maybe changes in consumer preferences. I know that that's wholesalers and corporations bearing some of the brunt. Wow. So I think it's a mix of things, and it's really hard to dissect and differentiate between what is causing the inflation to stay subdued right now.
Can you give us an example? You mentioned that some corporations are trying to sidestep the tariffs by some way. How is that happening?
So let's say like a country like China or Canada that has pretty restrictive tariffs right now with the US, they might ship to a country that has less restrictive tariff policy trade negotiations with the US first. And then it comes from that country and it's not directly from China or Canada. And so it's not effectively having to pay the same level of tariffs. Or maybe they add a production step in the process in a country that is going to be less impacted by trade negotiations with the US. And therefore, there's enough value add in that step of the production process that it's considered to be part of the trade negotiation with that country. Like you've seen, for example, Vietnam, their trading with the US has exploded over the last year. And I think that's part of it, is that China goods coming through a country like Vietnam. So that would be another example. And then just looking at, delays in the actual effectiveness of different tariffs, trying to get ahead of those. So you're kind of stocking the supply chain, moving items ahead of tariffs in order to sidestep the actual tariff impact. So those would be a couple examples.
I think previous presidents had used tariffs on particular goods like steel or
Right.
something, as opposed to putting them on a particular country.
Mhm.
And it seems to me that this country thing is being, there are workarounds that they're able to do that probably fly in the face of what the president was trying to accomplish.
Sure. And I think keep in mind that it's still product by product, which makes it even more difficult, because even with a country like China, you have different levels of tariffs on different types of goods. And so, like we've been able to come to a better understanding on like rare earth minerals or semiconductors from our side going to them, so there's bargaining chips even on the product level going beyond, the geography. So it gets, like I said, a little convoluted, and you need maybe more poli-sci education than I have.
Dan, I was also a finance major before I went to law school at the University of Florida, but I'm not, so I'd heard the word tariff, but tariff was not a word that really was in your mind much as we went through life until this year.
Well, the last 20 to 30 years, the US and the globe has really benefited from globalization, in that tariff levels were at kind of extreme lows, at least since the birth of the US. And there was a concerted effort of globalization with a lot of positives, some negatives as well, but a lot of positives. And so I'm not surprised at all that tariff wasn't in the vernacular, but we have seen some tick up in deglobalization over the last couple of years. And I think part of that was due to some concerns around what happened with COVID, with supply chains. That's, was the cause a lot of the inflation back in 2021. You also were looking at national security concerns with access to be able to make vaccines and whatever else. And so I think that maybe started it, and then that wave has just been ridden into different policy regimes and different reasons.
Well, going back 75 years, the U.S. evolved after the Second World War as the manufacturing powerhouse of the world and made us the economic powerhouse, which then gradually evolved into us becoming more of an information management economy, which some people criticize, saying we just don't manufacture enough things in this country. I know the current administration is boasting about bringing trillions of dollars of investment back into the country, but really it's staying steady at about $1 trillion a quarter of investment, because it simply isn't economically competitive to manufacture so many things in this country. But as this AI evolution begins to take place, and that relates to what you call the Magnificent Seven stocks, that's probably the main powerhouse behind the stock market getting to 50,000. What is it, dollars or points? Gee, I'm confused. Anyway,
just ask Pam; she knows.
Doesn't that mean that we really don't need to focus much on manufacturing? We've had the strongest economy in the world without being a predominantly manufacturing country?
Yeah, I think there are certain, again, going back to supply chain economics and the national security interests of supply chains. Some manufacturing probably does make sense to have here, so some reshoring or maybe nearshoring.
Well, that would be like the CHIPS Act that we had in the previous administration.
Exactly. Exactly.
Can't
Right.
be totally dependent on Taiwan for them.
Right.
Yeah.
So giving it Intel money, giving, recently the U.S. government has talked about and has taken stakes in public companies. So MP Materials is a company that comes to mind. But yeah, ultimately, manufacturing is certainly expensive to do here in the U.S. You certainly have lower cost goods and, more importantly, labor in other countries. Is that a good thing that you're exploiting lower cost labor in other countries? That's arguable. But I think ultimately, as you have this growth of the middle class worldwide, which you've already seen in China to a large extent. So a lot of the low cost labor is no longer in China, which was the first step in globalization, the most recent iteration, I guess, of globalization. But eventually you're going to move out of low cost labor in the world. And so I think manufacturing takes on the idea of where do we do our manufacturing might be driven by different reasons in the future.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a fairly simplistic question. It strikes me that impediments to trade are generally a bad idea, that globalization of trade is a good idea, with the exception you mentioned of exploiting people getting nothing working in Taiwan or somewhere. But I'm not sure why there seems to be this trend, at least in this country now, away from that general premise, which is globalization is good, trade is good, and yet we're doing things now, and I'm not asking you to get into politics, but we're doing things now that seem to me objectively to go against that premise.
So Europe is the cautionary tale. I mean, look at what they're dealing with energy prices because of their reliance on Russia. So over the last couple of decades, they really invested in, hey, we're going to move to renewables. We're done doing any drilling here. We're going to rely on Russia. We're going to run nat gas pipelines. We're going to get our energy needs from Russia. And then Russia invades Crimea, right? Back in 2013, Russia invades Ukraine. Energy costs skyrocketed in Europe. The economy still hasn't recovered. I would argue that part of the reason why the U.S. has been better off since the Russia-Ukraine war, and really since the pandemic, is because of our energy independence versus someone like Europe that is so dependent on a power that is, I don't want to say antithetical, but certainly against their own interests. And so it's those types of situations of at least the rhetoric that you'll hear of why, hey, we need to be focused on having enough control over our supply chains as we can, or having them with partners that we have no doubt are going to have aligned interests with us, which can shift over time, right? I mean, you go back to World War II, I'm pretty sure Russia was on the same side that we were. So things can change pretty quickly. And so I think, the conspiratorial view would be only your country. That's the only country you can trust. So I think we certainly can't get to that point, but there are certainly some industries that are of national security, vital interest that there should be more control over.
Well, let's pause for a moment to let you talk about Provise Management, the services you provide for your clients, and why somebody might want to walk into your office and do business with you.
Sure.
Dan Mannix, a senior investment manager for the firm. Tell us about some of the services that you provide your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are really excited to celebrate our 40th anniversary this year. Actually, August of this year, it'll be 40 years that we've been operating in and around the Tampa Bay area, based out of Clearwater, have another office in Tampa. And like I said before, we're a registered investment advisor that takes a fiduciary duty. So essentially, we believe strongly in the fact that just like you need a doctor for your physical health, you need a financial advisor for your financial health. And so it's really second only to physical health. And so we're doing everything we can to walk our clients through every type of life situation you can imagine, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, retirement, getting into the workforce. I mean, you name it. So our services include financial planning, retirement planning, asset protection, estate and trust planning. We even do retirement plan consultation for corporations. Some of our clients are business owners, and we'll help them with their retirement plans. Yeah. So we do a little bit of everything, but we have these financial planners that are certified financial planners, highest designation in the financial planning world. And they have that fiduciary duty to do what's in your best interest and to help you accomplish the goals that you have. Me, as a portfolio manager with the CFA designation, Chartered Financial Analyst designation, I'm throwing a lot of acronyms at you, also a fiduciary duty, responsibility to do what's in our client's best interest. I'm trying to synthesize everything that we're talking about here, plus a million other things, to position our clients to accomplish those goals that are being set out with the financial planners.
Yeah. And of course, you work with that whole team
Absolutely.
to make these decisions
Yes.
on how to steer your clients into what's in their best interest,
Yeah.
not in what's going to make you the fattest commission. Isn't that
That's right. We don't even
Yeah.
use commissions. We are a fee-based RIA. And so we do better when our clients do better, like you hear the old Fisher investments.
I've heard that somewhere.
I don't get a free dinner if I get reeled in, though, right? Everybody else is offering. We're going to pause for a short break to tell you about some of the other programs here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back. And when we come back, I want to ask you about Social Security and what you anticipate will happen when the trust fund runs out in just a few years, how Americans are going to deal with that. Maybe we'll talk about cryptocurrency and the national debt, what you anticipate is going to happen with that. You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Caregivers find the support they need on Connecting Caregivers Radio with Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregiver. Heard every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m., Linda and her caring and knowledgeable guests will bring you education, information, and resources, as well as a shoulder for caregivers. That's Connecting Caregivers Radio with Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregiver, where you can find help and hope every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Ain't it good?
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Join us, Glenn Schultz,
and co-host Berkeley Badger on SVA Live.
Wednesday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m.
It will be an informative 2 hours
that are vital to your health, wealth, and well-being.
Also, get ready for an opportunity to win great prizes.
And join in community events. That's SVA Live with Berkeley and Glenn.
Wednesdays, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m.
on SVAI Radio on AM 1340 and FM 106.1 WTAN.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
So Dan Mannix, one of the urban legends I hear conservatives who don't like government tell us is that the government can just print all the money it needs anytime it wants to pay its debts. And I wonder how it does that. I mean, if the government could do that, why do we have any national debt? And if the government prints $1 trillion, for example, it's sitting there at the government printing office. How do they get that money into circulation in the first place, given that the era of an actual Social Security check showing up in somebody's mailbox is gone? Same thing with welfare checks. Everybody's working off of debit and credit cards. If you put a client into treasury bills, you don't tell him to bring $10,000 down to your facility to buy it. And when he gets paid the interest on that, the government doesn't put $350 in an envelope and mail it to him. And similarly, when that bill comes due, cash is not involved in that transaction. So first of all, is it true that the government just prints money to pay its bills? And second of all, if it does, how does it circulate it? How does it use that doesn't pay contractors or employees with cash anymore. Those days are gone.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal on that? Is it just an urban legend, or is it?
That's a lot.
Or do they do it?
There's certainly some truth in that. So the government does print money to pay some of its debts. We obviously also have tax revenue. It would be the largest revenue to help pay debts. But yeah, essentially the way that it works is you have the U.S. Treasury, right? So they will issue Treasury debt, and they are then paid by these large dealers or banks that have reserves at the Federal Reserve. And so their reserve levels will be, dinged for the issuance of the treasuries, with the largest buyer being the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is buying these treasuries along with foreign governments, pension funds, endowments, individuals across the U.S. and across the globe. And so the way that the mechanics work, the way that you print debt is by, or print money is by issuing the debt. Theoretically, there is a blank checkbook, but in practice, that's not the case, right? So there has to be demand. So again, the Federal Reserve is going to be part of that demand, but you're also going to have other buyers of this debt in order to, print this money. And so, for example, yesterday you had a 20-year auction, so 20-year treasury that didn't go too well. And so when there's not enough demand, what they have to do is sweeten the deal, right? So they increase the rate that you would get, the interest that you will receive by lowering the price. So you might try to offer it at $100, but there's no buyers at $100 or maybe not as much as you wanted. And so now you offer it at 99.
Why do you think it did not go well yesterday? Curious.
So the 20-year is a historically weird maturity. And so if you looked at what we call the yield curve, so if you just plotted the yields of all the different maturities of treasuries on a chart, starting from 1 month all the way to 30-year, the 20-year, there's like a little kink where sometimes it's higher than the yield you would get on the 30-year, which would be, it wouldn't make a lot of sense academically speaking, because as an investor, if I'm going to lend you money, the longer I lend you the money for, I expect a higher return, right? That's a longer period of time that I go without my money. That's a longer period of time that you could mess something up and not be able to pay me back. But for some reason, the 20-year doesn't do as well. So they have to offer it at a little bit of a discount. So that's just an example of a treasury auction yesterday, but maybe not the best example because the 20-year is a little funky, I guess.
But even with $38 trillion of national debt, U.S. debt is still considered a secure investment, isn't it?
It is the risk-free asset of the world. Yeah.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Even though we just got a downgrade, what was that, last year or 2 years ago? I want to say 2024, but we got another downgrade back in 2013, I believe it was. So there are credit rating agencies, three of them, three main ones. And so two of them now have dropped the U.S. debt from AAA highest rating down to one notch below. And yet it continues to be the benchmark risk-free rate because essentially, effectively, I guess everything is relative.
Now, the national debt with other countries, the three countries primarily, correct? Canada, what, Japan?
It's Japan, China, and the third country, it's probably either Canada or Great Britain. I'd have to see.
Yeah, I think it's Canada. But isn't there the risk though they could call the debt? Or is that just theoretical?
Treasuries you cannot call. So there are certain kinds of bonds that have a callable feature, but the call is held by the issuer, not by the buyer. So it would be the U.S. that would call the debt, but they can't because it's not a callable bond.
So the only thing they could do is sell it to somebody else.
Exactly. You could sell it. And if everybody's trying to sell at the same time, then, supply demand, the price is going to go down.
Right.
Which effectively wouldn't bother the U.S. Treasury because you already got your payment up front, right? But what that does is that increases the yield or lowers the price. If you have lower demand for that particular bond, as they continue to try to issue new bonds, they're going to have to offer higher yields or lower prices.
But the OMB continues to predict at least $2 trillion of additional debt piling up every year. I think, don't they forecast out 10 years and no more than that? Is that correct?
I'm not exactly sure on that.
But I always see
but it's not
10-year
good. Those aren't
Yeah.
good numbers. You don't like to hear those numbers. I guess the one saving grace is if we look at debt as a percentage of GDP, so debt is a percentage of our economy, it's been pretty stable. And so, yes, the debt's going up, and so is the economy, but you don't want to fuel all of your economic growth with governmental debt. That's not healthy. So longer term, it is certainly an issue and something that needs to get figured out in this country and other countries.
Yeah, because just servicing that debt has now become the top ticket item of the federal budget.
Fourth, it's the fourth, I believe it's the fourth largest. So if you look at the mandatory funding, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, that's one block, right? That's more than, I think it's about 50% of the budget. The next item actually is larger than defense spending now, being interest expense. That's right.
And I don't think that the average person understands that, which I think the other effect of that is it just, what you're talking about is very little percentage of the budget is something that you can negotiate.
That's right. That's right. Discretionary.
Right, exactly. That's the word I was looking for.
So let's talk about Social Security. The trust fund now projected to be fully depleted by 2033. And it means that the government probably is going to need to make either an adjustment in the Social Security taxes, or it's going to need to reduce the distributions to beneficiaries.
Or increase the retirement age. That's really the only other lever you could pull.
Or
right?
a combination of all three.
Right. Which is probably the answer. There's probably not a silver bullet. It probably is higher taxes, lower benefits, longer retirement age, or higher retirement age. So
What about removing the income cap? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
right. So that's another, falling under the tax category of just removing the income cap or increasing the income cap.
Describe what the income cap is.
So beyond a certain income threshold, which depends on whether you're single or married, you no longer pay the Social Security tax as a W-2 employee. Yeah.
So it's like 170 something thousand now for
single. That sounds about right. I want to say it might be higher than that for married.
So if you're
it changes every year.
So if you're a Buccaneer player that makes $6 million, then you stop paying into Social Security at 170,000, even though you make $6 million.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I remember it used to be even like 45, 50,000. Back in the day, I know it keeps going up, but it sounds to me like, and I don't, I'm learning a lot today, that it's going to be a combination, as you said, Ed, of those. Those are all pieces of a solution, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you also have demographic issues with Social Security, right? That we have to tack on top. This problem isn't going to get easier, I think, going forward, as you look at, the aging demographic of this country, which a lot of the developed world is dealing with. Japan and China being the two largest examples right now. But ultimately, you have fewer workers paying for more retirees. I mean, for myself, I'm 41 years old. I don't expect to get, at least when I'm thinking about my own financial budgeting, when I'm thinking about my retirement, when I'm thinking about my future, I don't expect to get anything from Social Security.
Really? Why? As long as somebody goes to work, somebody's putting money into the Social Security
I think
system, right?
I think I'm conservative with my budgeting, trying to if I do get something, hey, that's a nice cherry on top.
Yeah.
But as it stands right now, as you just said, 2033, that's not very long from now. 7 years. I won't even be 50 yet.
We've mentioned there's a high percentage of the public that's their sole source of income is Social Security.
Sure.
They don't have any pension. They don't have any IRAs.
Yeah.
They have no savings. The point about working later, that is a reality to some extent. I used to be a circuit judge. The judges now used to have to retire at 70. That now mandatory retirement is 75. So there is some reality, I think, as maybe the health of many people seems to be, doing well, that people don't seem. I'm 67 and I still work. I don't feel like I had to retire at 65. So that part of it to me seems like that could be a decent part of the solution.
And the economy has changed, right? There's less blue collar. There's less physically demanding jobs and a lot more people sitting behind desks. So you arguably could work longer, I guess.
That's a good point.
Until AI takes away all the jobs, right? Well, let's talk about those 7 stocks that
The
he
Magnificent
mentioned.
Seven, isn't that what you call them?
Sure, that's the name that they've been given. It's certainly something a term that we'll use, but the truth of the matter is that they are not the same kind of company. They're all very different. They're actually in different sectors. They're not all in the technology sector. And they're not the 7 largest stocks anymore, actually. But the original Magnificent Seven, yes, they all have some level of exposure to artificial intelligence, whether that's consumption or production of. Yeah. So last year, the Magnificent Seven, well, let's just say the top 10 stocks, because the Magnificent Seven has kind of flipped a little bit with Tesla falling out, Broadcom going in. So let's just say like the top 10 stocks in the US, they made up about 50% of the S&P 500 market returns in 2025. So of 500 stocks, you have 10 representing half of the return. But keep in mind that those 10 also represent almost 40% of the size of the market. These are huge companies, behemoths.
Now, does China have a stock market? It does, doesn't it?
It does. China has they have a dual share class situation where there are shares that you can buy as a foreigner, but then there are shares that only Chinese people can buy and sell.
Okay.
But the stock market in China is much less mature than other markets. So when you think about China being the second largest economy in the world, it's shocking that their equity markets only make up, it's like 5% of global market cap. So a very immature, the Chinese people are more invested in real estate, commodities, that they tend to have different, and actually all countries invest less in stocks than a country like the US.
Did they attain 10% GDP a few years ago, China?
Did they do what? I'm sorry?
Attain a gross domestic product growth rate of 10% in 1 year?
Maybe on the back of, a government shutdown with the pandemic. That's possible.
Yeah.
So all economic growth was juiced because we just turned the switch off. But they've been growing by about 5% over the last couple of years, which is kind of average for China.
And we stay at about half of that, about 2.5% in the US.
Yeah, we've been doing a little bit better than that recently. We've been above potential growth, and part of that is due to what we were talking about before in the monetary and fiscal stimulus of the government, helping to kind of juice the growth here in the U.S.
Yes. So is there a danger of getting the growth too high in a year?
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, you want to be careful about without getting too term specific here, but like your potential growth over what your actual growth is, or vice versa. So your actual growth being above what the economy should be sustaining is what's going to lead to inflation. So ultimately, none of us want to go back to 2021, 9% level of inflation. We'd like to stick closer to that 2% level, which we're not back to yet. And I would say it's not going to happen this year or next year.
And what is your thought about inflation over the next few years? Do you have a sense?
I think inflation is kind of in the sense of when you think of the food delivery business, the most difficult part of it is the last mile, right? They say that last mile is the most difficult part of the distribution setup and delivery of food. I think in the same sense with inflation, this last 1%, this last mile is the most difficult. And part of that is due to just the stickiness, the ingrained nature of the last parts of this inflation that we're dealing with, depending on the categories. The biggest one being shelter. I mean, that's the biggest, stickiest part of inflation at this point that we've been experiencing. And ultimately, it's really difficult to get down to a 2% level, which, by the way, is kind of arbitrary. They just kind of came up with, all right, we want 2% inflation. They thought that sounded like a good number. Not that it was a wet thumb in the air, but probably not too far off, at least in my opinion. But I think 3% is higher than we would like longer term. It's going to be difficult to get it down to 2% without labor, without employment coming down. Ultimately, it's hard to break the back of inflation without breaking the back of wage growth, which is not what you want to see. So right now, what we've got is real wage growth, which is important. Yes, inflation is going steadily right now. I wouldn't say it's going up, but it's pretty steady. Wage growth has been higher than inflation. And so that's positive real wage growth, which is important. That's sustaining this momentum because consumers are 2/3 of U.S. economic growth. It's the money that consumers are spending. And so that obviously changes when people lose their jobs.
But now if Powell retires, or I should say when he retires and a new chairman comes in the Fed, and if he lowers interest rates as the president wants him to, tell me if I'm right, that would first generate a spike in the economy that would then lead to a spike in inflation. Is that the way it would work? And is that why Powell has been reluctant to bring interest rates down?
So we lowered interest rates, 3 times last year? The we being the Fed, they're lowering short-term interest rates. It is kind of like a sugar high. It gives a boost, not only to the economy, but also to stocks and bonds. The Fed was expecting to cut rates once this year. The market is hoping for 2. Kevin Warsh has historically been pretty dovish. He was kind of Ben Bernanke's right-hand man back during the great financial crisis, has a lot of great experience. But his tone recently is, I would say, been more hawkish. So it'd be interesting to see how all that works out. But keep in mind that Jerome Powell hasn't said just yet, but he can stay on as a board governor. This committee of 12 people that are deciding what the interest rate is going to be. He hasn't said whether he's going to stay on or not, but he could still be involved with those committee decisions moving forward. But we don't think as a firm that we need to cut interest rates. To your earlier point, the economy is strong. There's really no reason to try to restoke or reignite inflation with lowering interest rates, because essentially what you're doing is you're lowering the cost of things. You're lowering the hurdle rate to take on risk, which is what creates asset bubbles.
Is the cost of fuel a relevant factor in inflation? I ask that because it's come down about $1 a gallon over the past year, but prices have not followed.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 2 measures that we look at with inflation broadly. It's either a headline inflation number or a core inflation number. So core inflation strips out food and energy because those categories are pretty volatile. So when you think about the Fed's 2% inflation target, what they're looking at is actually not CPI, which is what a lot of people look at. It's PCE. It's personal consumption expenditure inflation. Again, I'm giving you a lot of acronyms here, but that is the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, and they actually are looking at core when they're coming up with their target. So they're excluding food and energy when coming up with what they would like inflation to be.
Okay.
Us older folks remember in the 70s, inflation was 15, 16, 17, 18%. It brought down Jimmy Carter's presidency, among other things. And then in 2021, I think, would you agree with me that number, you could explain why there was high inflation because of the pandemic, et cetera. It seems like it's gone back to more normalcy now.
Yes. Yeah. And a couple of the major reasons there being the dynamics that were in place, the mechanics, I guess I would say, back in 2021 are really not there right now. They've been resolved. So you really had a classical supply push and demand pull inflation at the same time, which is not good. So you had supply chain bottlenecks, right? You had, companies, warehouses, manufacturing, industrial, all had to shut down, right? Nobody could work. So the supply chain got all jammed up. And then on the demand side, you were just giving people checks. And so you had people sitting at home. They couldn't go anywhere. And keep in mind, we are a services-based economy. That's where most Americans spend their money, is services. They couldn't do that. And so what are they going to do? They're going to buy a bread maker and learn how to make bread, or all these things that they weren't doing before. They were buying goods. Our economy, our supply chain was not set up to handle that level of demand for goods. On top of the fact that there was a supply chain shutdown, which you can't just flip a switch back on and everything just is working great. So there were a couple things in place there. Supply chains have eased. Those disruptions are gone. And then we're not handing out checks anymore. I mean, there is still some stimulus going on, particularly on the corporate level. And we will see on the consumer level this side with one big, beautiful bill act of probably the largest tax refund in U.S. history in April.
Wow. And is that anticipated to add to the debt, or is it presumed that that rebate will be spent and help reduce it?
So it depends on who you ask. But I would say the projections that I've seen is that it's going to add to the debt.
Wow.
It's going to add to the debt. So will it add to the economy as well in a way that offsets some of that? Sure. But I think from at least the projections that I've seen, that it will add to the debt. So again, it's the short-term mechanic where the markets will react positively, but longer term stokes inflation, adds to the debt.
My last question is about today's current buzzword, affordability. Both parties claim they can make life more affordable. What can politicians do to actually achieve that? And maybe that's an unfair question to throw to you, but there must be something that they plan to do if they're talking about it.
That's a tough one. There are a lot of different components to that. We talked about earlier about shelter inflation being the largest, stickiest issue with inflation. That is probably where I would start. So we need to increase the housing supply, particularly affordable housing. So that is, the number one expense for most families, right? So I think that's where you have to start. So part of that is getting rid of some zoning restrictions and the fees that builders have to pay in order to get a permit on a plot of land. It's to a level where it doesn't make sense anymore for them to build a small 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, right? We all talk about, that was the American dream. And, in the 50s, you could buy a house when you were 20 something years old, and now people can't afford a house. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and it had no air conditioning and maybe no electricity. And it was, you can't build those anymore because it's just too expensive for these builders. So that's one thing, but there's a myriad of other things.
Well, in our final minute, tell us again about Provise Management and what you do for your clients and why your services are valid and important.
Sure. Our tagline is, that we're helping people navigate all of the circumstances that come up in life. I mean, there are so many events that we all go through, and we all have different goals, and it's not cookie cutter. We're all trying to do something different. And so, we're all about financial advice for your life and your lifestyle. So, whatever you consider to be success, we're helping you navigate those things. We're coming alongside you like the doctor would on your physical health for your financial health. And if anybody wants to learn more, provise.com, provise.com, complimentary consultation if you want to speak with somebody to learn more.
Very good. And you're right here in Clearwater on Druid Street.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Dan Mannix.
Thanks for having me.
Dan's a senior portfolio manager with the firm. That's all the time we have for today, but we'll be back next Thursday with another edition of The Voice of Reason, and I hope you'll join us at 9 o'clock. I want to thank my two co-hosts, Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. I'm Ed Golly. I remind you, the statement seems a little too implausible to be true. Don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour.